We are today going to talk about translation and multilingualism and literature's influence of that dual stream of languages. Let me just say a few words about this broadcast and then pass it on to our guest moderator today. So my name is Natasha Djorovichova. I'm from the International Writing Program. I would like to welcome you here and say a few words about the upcoming programming here for IWP for this week. Following today's panel, 5 to 6 p.m., we will be reading at the Shanbhag House with Yaroslava Pulinovich from Russia and Tatiana Troitskaya from the Ukraine. On Sunday at 4 p.m., we will have a pre-rights reading where Rebecca Hansen's read from the translation program here, Khaled Al-Khamisi from Egypt, and Courtney Meredith from Sina will be Sina Meredith from New Zealand will be reading, and And next week's panel here at the Iowa City Public Library will be called Real Work, as opposed to the not real work that we apparently also do. This will be a panel about how daytime work influences one's creative writing. So, without further ado, today's panel will be moderated by a special guest. We are so pleased to have with us Susan Harris, who arrived from Chicago yesterday to give a workshop and who will be doing more programming today. Susan Harris, for those of you who read international literature in translation in the United States, Susan Harris really needs no introduction. She's the editorial director of Words Without Borders, which is the journal that more than a dozen years ago now really launched a sustained and systematic and sort of on a grand scale project of bringing world literature in translation to readers everywhere in the Anglophone world. And Words Without Borders has been a monthly pleasure, treasure trove of new voices, new ideas, new ways of reading. And so it's a special pleasure for her for us to have her here today to moderate today's panel. Susan Harris is also a former founder of the imprint Hydra from Northwestern University Press, and now, as we say, editorial director of Words Without Borders. Please help me welcome Susan Harris.
Thanks so much, Natasha. Thanks all of you for coming. Welcome. I'm going to very quickly introduce our panelists and then let them present their talks. Moving right to left, we have Stephanos Stephanides from Cyprus, professor of English and comparative literature at the University of Cyprus. His poetry has been published in a dozen languages. He received the American Anthropological Association's First Prize for Poetry in 1988 and a First Prize for Video Poetry for his Poets in No Man's Land at the Nicosia International Film Festival. He's a general editor of the European Journal of English Studies and has served as a judge for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. To his left, we have Shenaz Patel of Mauritius. She's written many novels, plays, and short stories in both French and Mauritian Creole. Best known, her 2005 novel, Silence des Chagos. As a working journalist, she writes about social and cultural issues, and much of her writing seeks to unearth the unsaid and untold. Odeh Bisharat of Israel is an Israeli newspaper columnist and political activist. His first novel, The Streets of Zaytunia, was translated into Hebrew and Finnish. The Hebrew translation of his second novel, Donia, will be released next year. Thett of Myanmar won a Pen Translation Award for Bones Will Crow, 15 contemporary Burmese poets, co-edited with James Byrne. His Burden of Being Burmese of last year explores the untenable notion of Burmese. After working in Southeast Asia and Europe, Thett returned to his native Yangon. He writes in both Burmese and English. Vivek Shanbhag of India is an engineer by training, the author of 2 plays, 5 short story collections, and 3 novels. His writing has appeared in Granta, Seminar, and Indian Literature. His most recent novel, Gashar Goshar, appeared in English in 2006. He writes in Kannada and is the founder of the literary magazine Desha Kala. So we welcome you, and Stephanos, do you want to start?
Okay, thanks very much. I prefer to speak rather than read, but I'm afraid of going over time. But nonetheless, I'll do my best, because I'd rather speak to you rather than have you all read what I'm reading. Beginning with my own situation of an island in the middle of a sea and in between different continents, kind of defining the territory is very complex, and we're always on the edge of different languages, and as well as layers of languages diachronically. And this has been accentuated by my own life trajectory of leaving and then coming back, spending half my life outside and the last half inside. So all these multiple crossings have kind of shaped the way I think about language, and I think that's true of a lot of the writers here that I'm interacting with. And I was, so in effect, writing in language is a kind of a constant process of deterritorialization. And I was particularly struck about 15 years ago when I came across a letter from Kafka, who talks about he's also caught between Yiddish, German, Czech, in writing in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he talks about the impossibility of writing in Yiddish or in Czech or in German, and the impossibility of not writing and the impossibility of writing. So it's a kind of, it reminded me of a kind of the mystical mantra from the Upanishads, which is neti, neti, not this, not this, not this. So writing becomes like a mystical negative theology, if you like, in which there is a constant line of flight. And which I feel, and I like this metaphor of line of flight, which I take from Deleuze and Guattari, because in a sense my own life and writing has always been a line of flight between different places, and a constant process of deterritorialization and reterritorialization, and always being caught in between. And what I found useful is this is a tetralingual linguistic formula, which looks at the four functions of languages: vernacular, cosmopolitan, national, and mythical, what is beyond. And I feel I'm always caught up among these languages. There's the cosmopolitan or hegemonic English, there's the vernacular Cypriot of my mother tongue, there's a reference, a language of cultural reference that could be Greek, but it's also somewhere else. So it's being here, there, elsewhere, and somewhere else. And then there's the mythical language of our imagination that or through various myths of the past and mystical myths. So it's always negotiating and playing around these edges, not letting one or the other dominate. And in terms, so in this respect, I would not go with the camp of Robert Frost, who says that poetry is lost in translation. I'm more like Brodsky and many others who would say that poetry is found in translation. So I see translation as foundational to literary tradition. So I think translation comes before tradition. We see this in the process of the vernacularization of literatures in the early Renaissance in Europe. In the 20th century, I think the Americas, not the United States, I mean Las Americas especially, with people like Borges in the lead, have taken a very radical stand in this irreverent and kind of sacrilegious approach of the cosmopolitan Argentine, who makes some wonderful statements about translation. One of them is the original is unfaithful to the translation. El original es infiel a la traducción. And although Borges has been in the vanguard, I think you see this throughout the Americas. In Brazil, there's the cannibalistic tradition of translation, where they say it all began with when the first when the Indians ate the first missionary. So it kind of displaces the question of origin in this cannibalization of the European tradition by eating it and making it something of their own. In my part of the world, although I think these processes of transculturation have taken place, there's been an over-determination of a sense of origin. And one of the oldest stories of translation is of the translation of the Bible from Hebrew to Greek. And in order to ensure that this myth of the Septuagint, that 70 translators were asked to translate the Bible from Hebrew to Greek. But they were put in separate cells and not allowed to talk to each other, so they could only talk to God. And they miraculously came up with 70 identical translations, because there was no human interference or mediation interfering. So the story, like many other stories of translation, embodies our impossible desire for a pre- or post-Babylonian condition, although this desire is in effect there, like the Walter Benjamin's famous essay, The Task of the Translation. He talks about the translator has to strive for pure language, but pure language is impossible because it comes before and after speech as an Edenic language, but nonetheless there's the impossible, translation is impossible in effect, but nonetheless necessary. And necessary in the sense that we look for kinship between languages, even though language is impossible. So so any text or translation is a constant proliferation of meanings in striving for this impossibility. Okay, thank you. So in effect, let's just to conclude, as writers, I'd say in other words, what I'm trying to emphasize is translation itself is a way of creating literariness. As writers, we probe the difference in the play of literary language. Even if we're monolingual, I think there's shifts of the spectrum within our own language. And this is doubled in translation. Sharpening awareness of the interplay of languages is not easy, as the literary and linguistic economies of exchange are not the same everywhere. So I think this is the complexity of negotiating between poetics and politics of language. Yet, as writers, it always provides us with the pleasure of continuous literary experimentation in making the strange familiar and the familiar strange. So it's, in a sense, for me, it's a continuous process of intimate estrangement. Okay, thank you.
My turn. Okay. Hello, everybody. I don't like to read either, but I tend to fumble with English because it's just my borrowed language. So I go for the paper to start with. A flow, a tide, an ebbing, moving sands, pebbles carried back and forth by trickling and patient waves. That's what translation is to me. Something shifting, forever unstable, challenging, desirable, and beautiful in this very instability. I have two mother tongues, French and Creole. My mother and father brought me both languages as gifts when I was born. We spoke both at home. French, the colonizer's language, which survived the British colonization of Mauritius, and Creole, that marvelously hybrid language, born and raised in countries where colonizers, slaves, and later indentured laborers were thrown together by the violence of history and had nevertheless to find a way to communicate. I tried to fathom what when we would shift from one language to another. It was Creole for talking politics and when we were angry, among other things. I also found out when growing up that Creole had few words to talk about love matters, so much for history and for its after effects. A language, as we all know, is not only a communication tool, it also reflects culture, how a population sees and conceives of itself and its surrounding world. One day a friend told me that in Chinese the word peace is represented by a particular ideogram, and then I met Victoria, who told me that it wasn't the word peace, it's the word safe, and in Chinese the word safe is represented by the ideogram of a woman sitting under a roof. And I find that so interesting. A language is an ever-evolving thing, and Creole, to me, through its particular history of domination and survival, is an incredibly inventive language, full of vitality. Domination, though, is a tough-skinned thing. And even nowadays, in contemporary Mauritius, Creole still has to fight to establish itself as a true language, as a real language, and not just a patois or an inferior, how do you say, idiom? Idiom, thank you. We are a nation of immigrants. People came or were brought in from France, England, from Mozambique and Nigeria, from India and China, to make up our population. Today, regardless of their origins, 90% of Mauritians say that Creole is their mother tongue. And yet, English is the official language of Mauritius, though it's a language that we don't really get to hear in our everyday life. So Mauritian children grow up speaking Creole, being surrounded by Creole, and then when they reach 5, they go to school, primary school, and they are taught everything in English, which is for them a totally foreign language. It's as if here in America, children were going to school and being taught everything in French, for example. And the result is ruthless. Nearly 50% of children aged 10 and or 11 are thrown out of the education system at the end of the primary cycle. For years, some educators and linguists in Mauritius have fought to make one thing heard. We don't have to oppose languages. They fertilize, irrigate, and enrich each other. And all the studies show that a child has a better chance of learning other languages if you value him in his mother tongue. So the fight for us writers as well has been to translate and to create in Creole, to create a body of text, to show that Creole is as much a language as any other. One Mauritian writer has translated the whole of Shakespeare's plays in Creole. On my side, I tried to translate a variety of things, going from a comic book like Tintin, I don't know if you know about the comic Tintin, which has been translated in 180 languages around the world, to Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, The Hate of Abstraction. I nearly lost all my hair when I said, why did you go into this? But then it was a real challenge to get that abstraction through in Creole, and it was really a fascinating work. Today a consensus has been reached. We have an official spelling for Creole. We have the first unilingual Creole dictionary, because everywhere around the world you have bilingual dictionaries, so Creole French, Creole English, etc. And in Mauritius, 2 years ago, we've had the first Creole dictionary, and it's first in the world. And Creole has been introduced in our schools, finally. So things are moving forward, slowly but surely, I hope. When asked one day about my favorite word in Creole, I said it was the word la corité. La corité is very hard to translate. It's somewhere between concord and unity. But then again, it's not that. It doesn't have the grandiloquence of these words. Maybe it's just a way of telling about a kind of solidarity, simple and serene understanding and sharing between ordinary people. Language is a marker of culture. The other day, I learned from another fellow writer, Vladimir. You see, this has been a very collective work. Where's Vladimir? So I learned from Vladimir that there is a Bulgarian word for translating the word, you tell me if I'm saying it well, prevodach, that's it, which is used as much for translating words and texts as it is to talk about things carried from one place to another. I love this image. Making up translators a kind of ferryman or ferrywomen, smuggling across words and feelings and emotions and concepts and ideas that in turn make the world. I like the idea of language as an ongoing voyage across vast lands and unknown seas. Thank you.
From on this side, that's okay. Yes. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, sorry. I just wanted to show you this book. It's a Mauritian poem that has been translated in 55 languages. It's in Creole. And the book has gone out a few months ago. So if you'd all like to have a look at it, it's Creole poem called Petit bateau papier, which means the small paper boat. And it's in 55 languages now, so I think most of us here will find his own language in that book.
Very good. Thank you very much. My mother language is Arabic. My first words were Arabic. I express my feelings in Arabic. Even carnations have a special smell when I spell the word in Arabic, qurunful. Language is not just a tool for spreading and receiving information. Over time, it becomes a vital part of your personal and social experience. Our sense of pain and joy passes through our language. So it is not just a pipe you can replace with an English, a German, or a Japanese pipe. The language becomes a part of your being and is involved in the meanings of the words themselves. When I was 7 years old, I began studying Hebrew in school. When I was 15, I could often be found waiting for the Hebrew newspapers, which came around noon. In the 70s and 80s, the internet did not exist, and there were only a small number of TV channels. For us, the wide world was in the Hebrew newspapers. Today I write in both these languages, Arabic and Hebrew. I love them both. On one hand, the Arabic language is rich in metaphors. These metaphors enable the ancient Arabic poets to express different and complicated feelings which now, thousands of years later, return their glory. Sometimes, when I don't understand what's going around me here in Iowa, because of my language, I remember Abu Tayyib al-Mutanabbi, the greatest Arab poet through the centuries, who said he felt like al-fata al-arabiyyu fiha gharib al-wajhi wal-yadi wal-lisani. The Arabic young man feels that his face and hands and tongue are strange. Even the ancient Arab poets, who were illiterate, created wonderful poems to describe nature and the spirit of the people in the desert. In addition, they describe the desire to fight injustice and oppression. Arab today, even if Arabs today wants to surrender, the Arab language would prevent them. They may remember this saying of Al-Mutanabbi himself, الخيل والليل والبيداء تعرفني والسيف والرمح والقرطاس والقلم. This means the horses, the night, the desert know me, the swords, the spears, the paper, and the pen. On the other hand, since the beginning of the last century, Hebrew language has renewed itself. It draws from its rich past and developing consistently and adapting this new age. For a long time, I was known among Arab readers when I was in the political scene. I often asked myself, why the Hebrew media was dominated by Jewish journalists only, and why they alone had the right to shape the public opinion in Israel, while the Arab inhabitants were only in the position of being shaped. I tried for a long time to enter this world without success, and it was 6 years before when the editor of Haaretz Aluf Ben opened the door and I started writing opinion pieces. Later I began to write a weekly article. I don't write in an empty space. I don't write only for myself. I write from within myself, but I hope others will understand me. So when I write, I put myself in the reader's position and I ask myself, did the reader understand my intentions? For me, this is a cardinal question when I write fiction or non-fiction. Generally, when I write an article for a newspaper, I would call this rational writing. You raise arguments and you try to refute other arguments. Today in Israel, there is a much discussion regarding fundamental issues, such as Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the problems of the problematic definition of Israel, and the status of Arab citizen in Israel. So I can write in both languages normally. My weekly articles deal with current affairs, and these current affairs affect me personally, creating feelings of happiness, sadness, or anger. For example, when Arab Spring began in Egypt, I wrote very warm articles about the Egyptian people. The title of one of these articles was, in Hebrew newspaper, ربنا يحميك يا مصر. This in Arabic. شئلهيم يشمر أتاخ يا مصر. This in Hebrew. God protect you, English, this is for you. This title was written in both Arabic and Hebrew. In all these cases, I have no problem with writing and expressing myself. However, my writing in Hebrew is still Arabic writing. I mean here that I am carrying on my back, even when I write an article, my baggage, the Arabic legacy, literature, popular stories, saying, and legends. Literature is another story. Here you deal with deep and long-term issues. So when I am writing literature, I try to be relaxed, far away from daily worries. I wrote my novels in Arabic. In this case, I wrote about my personal experience. I can write about my experience and feelings in Hebrew, but in Arabic, my feelings flow out as a part of me. Now I live in 4 words: Arabic, Hebrew, fiction, and non-fiction. I feel good about all these words. Here in Iowa, I am trying to enter a 5th word, the amazing English language world. Thank you very much.
Bloody tongue at language's edge. The edge of language is the edge of the seal adhesive of an envelope you lick to engulfing the corpse of a poem you wish you had never written. While tonguing and wetting the triangular edge of the envelope, you don't realize your tongue gets cut. By the time you sense a taste of warm, salty, musty liquid on your palate, it's too late. Squeamish as you are, you have already swallowed the blood of your own tongue. I'm talking about bloody tongue. When the mother tongue embraces you like a failed state, she will never let you off. Bloody tongue, they say, is the word of destiny against, the sword of destiny against the wooden tongue of tyranny. Yet, history has proven that it is bloody tongue that gets cuts after cuts after cuts after cuts after cuts, again and again and again and again. Though, why are you having recurrent nightmares in which you are thrown into a ring to find yourself wrestling with two postmodern Goliaths, the mode of production of poetry and the commodification of poetry? Lay, you've come out of the closet. The closet is very crowded, yet you cannot escape. Everywhere you want to go, margin, conceptual, post-conceptual, alternative, queer, underground is packed. Your presence in the margin is not welcome. You have just become another widening factor for the margin, which has now invaded the main page. Then you do what a wolf does when it finds a goat hide. It chews on it while sleeping on it. Nga, how do you write history in a language that has no past tense? Chow, you say bloody tongue is a silver bullet for what you call creative angst. Once you suggested to a poet in writer's block that he betrays his own bloody tongue. Just go out on a date with another bloody tongue, you said. How come a poet ended up in a writer's block in the first place? Corn, what do you do when your first bloody tongue says, I have a book, and the second one says, there's a book inside me. Your mother tongue says, I go to school. Your second tongue insists, I school to go. Each time you utter a sentence, your second bloody tongue utters another sentence in inversion. The split of your bloody tongue will turn your tongue into a snake tongue. No worries. People will read you as if you were the venomous, the original. Shit. Look what I have done to Mount Chonoe's fish. Fish. All my life, I haven't caught a single perch. Look now, the entire universe hangs twitching at the end of my line. As I reel the damn whale in, my rod bends into a rainbow. I turn into a fish. Go. As far as I am concerned, the most unpronounceable and untranslatable word, yet the most useful cure for creative angst is perkele. And perkele means devil in Finnish. And some people believe perkele is the original name of Ukko, the Zeus of the Finnish pagan pantheon. In what other bloody tongue is there a word that might mean God as well as Satan? When you say perkele in agony with a rolling R, Satan and God will be at each other's throat in their scramble to your rescue. To say, I may be able to Burmese my English, I may be able to English my Burmese, but I will not finish my Burmese. No, My Burmese finished. Perkele. I've been reciting Burmese numerals in Burmese, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numerals, the most translatable. The samsara is long and endless, and we don't have all day. So, you ask your lover, what have we done to deserve this? Poetry, she says.
Very good.
In the part of India that I come from,
Your echo is fast.
in the part of India that I come from, most people know at least 3 languages. I know 4, thanks to the linguistic diversity of the country. My mother tongue is Konkani, but I write in a language called Kannada. The mother tongue of many of the great writers of my language is not Kannada. It is important to know that writing in a language that is not one's mother tongue happens naturally and effortlessly. The mother tongue need not be the language in which one writes. In my everyday life, I translate all the time. This is how the several worlds around me interact with each other. While writing, many times I translate from Konkani to Kannada and English to Kannada. For example, many experiences took place in my mother tongue, so in order to write about them in another language, I must translate this experience. Fortunately, I am not conscious of this process, or else I would not be able to write a word. For instance, if I have to recollect a conversation from my childhood, I don't translate it word by word. If I become very conscious, I become a translator, and I am not a translator. So I must recreate that experience in Kannada. With every language comes a new world, a different ethos and a system of values, and a different way of perceiving this world. Moving across these languages has deeply influenced my language structure, the phrases I use, and so on. In the process, my literary language has developed its own flavor. Despite knowing several languages, why did I choose to write fiction in Kannada? My deep engagement with this language is such that I had no choice. Kannada is the language through which literature came to me. To write fiction, one needs to be involved intensely with the language and have deep emotional and intellectual ties to it. Through the language, a writer seeks to touch and understand unknown dimensions of life. Sound and rhythm become important in capturing an experience in its entirety. I am looking for a depth that is unknown to me. So it is a humbling and gratifying experience when a reader or a critic discovers many layers and insights of a creative work. Writing is a process that finds its fruit only when it is understood by someone else. We do it together. In recent years, I have actively participated in the translations of my own work into English. This has made me aware of the strengths and limitations of my writing like never before. There are so many aspects that a writer takes for granted while writing in a specific language, most of which will not be available in another. This is a huge challenge that raises the inevitable question, for whom do we write? It makes one admire the literature that has survived through many centuries, crossing different cultural context and language barriers. I feel this awareness makes one strive for that bareness in some stories that is very pure and is closest to human nature. I believe translation is not bringing the meaning of every sentence of the original into another language. It is to bring what is unsaid in a work from one language into another. Words have memories and have a history of their own. There are no 2 words of the same meaning. Therefore, to recreate this unsaid in another language, one needs to understand what goes into making the original, what it takes to dismantle and rebuild into another language. Being involved in the translation of my work has made me aware of my writing abilities and shortcomings. I feel it is an opportunity that a writer must explore to relook at her or his own creative process. Thank you.
Please write your, thank you. These were great. These were really, well, they always are, but these were especially great. Please write your questions for the panelists on the little cards that Kelsey will collect. I just wanted to say that Kelsey Vanede is the person who edits and polishes the text every week. And you will always be able to find them at the end of every Friday on our website. You need to open the website, iwpuiowa.edu, and go on the archives, where you will find the link to the presentations, library presentations for this week. So while Kelsey collects, I will hand over the mic to Susan. Yeah.
Thanks, Natasha. I do have one question for all of you. Thank you. Again, we're talking about living at the edge of language, but all five of you, some of you write in English, some of you write in other languages, you all speak English. For those of you who do not write in English, how has living in English in your time in Iowa affected your writing? Shenaz, do you notice?
I tend to see myself as, I don't know, there's a picture, there's a sculpture by Salvador Dali, the woman with the drawers, and it's like when I'm speaking in English, I'm in a conversation with someone, and I'm, at the same time, I'm kind of opening all the drawers to find the right word. I know it's somewhere, but it just doesn't come up at that precise moment. And it's very frustrating because you feel like you have to go around and use other words to try to convey what you want to say, and you feel like being a bit stupid because it's not exactly what you want to say. So that's a bit frustrating, but at the same time, I think it's strange that after a while, you are surrounded by people who speak English all the time, and you get to speak English all the time, and then one morning you wake up and you said, well, I've just had that thought in English, and where does it come from? So yes, I think it's very enriching and fun. Yeah.
Odeh, how about you?
Yes. Sometimes, not sometimes, I feel lost, but I keep serious and I try to understand everything, every word, and I'm saying oh yes. But you know, sometimes I catch a word from what he says because he speaks with a very complicated, the accent very difficult, wow, and Israel, for example. So I know he's speaking Israel, so I began to speak about Israel, about Arab, Jewish occupation, equality, but maybe he asked about another question. But generally, there is a lot of people here that I met that I can understand them when they are speaking. Even they are original Americans. They speak with their accent, but they speak very, very clear. And you can, and I feel that they want to examine me, not to examine me in the negative word, the positive word, if I understand or not. The majority don't care if you understand or not. They continue speaking. You are understand, not understand. It's for them. It's yes. Only they want to express themselves, and you are damn it. Understand, not understand. Okay. They want to, like the postman with the letter. He give you the letter, you read and throw or not. Because I think this is the psychology of the Americans, that they are a dominant country. It's a very big country. And for the Arabs, when I speak with American who doesn't know Arabic, and I speak in Arabic, I speak as I speak with a child. كان الولد هنا. The child was here. You understand? Yes, I understand. I continue. Here, no, everything. But generally, I think through 1 month, I improved my English with my friends here. We have also a different, accents. The Indians and from your countries, from Burma, but generally I love this place. I love still this place, and I want to improve my language. I hope that I will succeed. Thank you. So please speak slowly. Like dancing. How are you?
I must speak very slowly now. I think my experience has been different in the sense, I'm not talking about English, but from the time that I have come here, I've really enjoyed being with so many writers from different countries whose mother tongue is not English or whose first language is not English. And that is when one sees the way they express themselves, the kind of phrases, the kind of metaphors they use, the kind of images. I think it's very, very interesting if you sit in a common room and listen them speak. And for me, that has been a very great experience.
And of course, when we're talking about English in Iowa, we're talking not only about what we think of as Midwestern vernacular, but obviously there's this wonderful cross-fertilization of those of you who are coming to English as a second or subsequent language and really imbuing it and informing it with your native languages, so that you're all perhaps learning different varieties of English in your time here. I know that because I am so accustomed to speaking to people for whom English is a second language or subsequent, that I often find myself speaking as if someone in a booth is simultaneously translating, which actually is not necessarily a bad thing, because it does make one slow down and consider one's thoughts. Yes, exactly. How many characters have I left? And we have some questions from the audience. Here is one. Speaking of language, a language is the universe translated into that language, wrote Jose Antonio Ramos Sucre, a Venezuelan poet who spoke 8 languages. Do you agree? A language is the universe translated into that language. In some ways, I think, inarguable, but I think then we have to ask, as we always do, certainly, particularly in Iowa and in the program, who is the translator? And what is the source and what is the target? What do you think, Vivek?
Yeah, I think there is. I agree with that statement. The reason is, it is not possible to capture your experience as it is, which is what it is trying to say. If we could capture everything in our language, every physical experience, then we wouldn't be writing it. The world would have been so much easier. So I think to that extent, it is true that language is the one that translates a universe into that language.
And are there universes that exist? If we take this to an extension, are there universes that exist solely in certain languages? Or is that undercutting the notion of the universal experience?
I think, all of us know that there are no 2 words of the same meaning. And that is why it is the world, the universe in that language is so unique. Really, in my personal opinion is that translation of anything is impossible. We are only trying to, exactly, accurately, anything is impossible from one language to the other, unless it is numbers, unless it is something very simple that, But any poetry, any literature, it is very, very difficult and almost impossible to bring into another language. And the reason is that, as I said, there is every words and sentences have memories attached to it. And when I utter something in my own language, which could be as simple as stand up, it may invoke certain things in my mind, because that word stand up means certain points to a poetry that was written in 12th century. It has certain meaning in that language. It evokes those memories. It is not the same thing in English. And the moment I say it, I may translate it. I may translate that sentence and bring that meaning into English. But it has just lost that power of stand up.
I just wanted to rebound on your first question, because I think we talked about spoken English, and your question was about writing. I write in French and in Creole, but I read a lot in English, because I think that I find nowadays a vitality in Anglophone edition that I don't find in French edition. So I would like to be able to write in English, because I think that perhaps what I write would find a better place in an Anglophone surrounding. I think there's much more vitality in the language in itself when you read someone like Arundhati Roy, how she takes English and what she does with it. I think that's absolutely fascinating, and you don't really find that in French literature, except at one time there was where people like Patrick Chamoiseau, who wrote a book called Texaco, where he had a lot of Creole coming in and kind of changing French. But I think there's a vitality in Anglophone literature and publishing, which is not the same thing, which is perhaps more challenging and interesting than what's happening in the French edition.
Interesting.
Nowadays.
What about the rest of you? Do you read are you also reading widely in English, or are you reading primarily in what languages? Obviously, Stephanos, you're right, you're reading quite widely in English.
Yeah, but in a lot of other languages as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it reverberates into it, and also the way, this is why the previous statement for me was rather complex.
Yes.
Because for me it's always a process and a movement, and it's our embodied memories, and our bodies are always changing and being transformed. So the universe is open, and this is why we keep writing and writing on. So I think it's to say that language is the universe, it makes it a bit too static. So maybe, I don't know what the deep implication of that, but I think it could be nuanced much more. If I felt I could capture the universe in a language, I've captured it in the language, I would stop writing. But it's the fact that you're always trying to make the world, and it's remaking itself and remaking you at the same time.
Remaking, and then, of course, every translation remakes.
Yeah.
And remakes again. Again, as one translator has said that when he translates, it's the author's book, but in his words, which, of course, is I think, a wonderful way of looking at it. Vivek, you mentioned that you have collaborated with your translators. Have the rest of you also collaborated with translations of your work into other languages? When you do, have you been in situations where you have actually revised? And in response to what?
See, I have not revised in terms of the story, nor even sentences, right? However, in Kannada, it gives you a certain freedom to move across tenses. But in English, if you do, it will be completely confusing. Because that is something that is natural to a Kannada reader. And we writers, because we know it, we make use of it. So that is the first thing. Second is, English requires absolute clarity. There is a space in Kannada where one can be vague and still steer through. So these are the things that first come to my mind. And then most importantly, like Coco mentioned, that there is the verb comes in the end of the sentence. And I think it is not just a grammar, but it's a way of looking at the world.
Yes.
Right? So that is very important. So that's why when I work with my translator, I don't work with them to tell him what is the meaning of the sentence in English. But I work with him to tell him or her what is it which has gone in making this work.
Yes.
Why have I used this word here and again somewhere else and again somewhere else? And what is it that I am trying to do? What is my intention? Right? Because unless the translator understands my intention, it is not possible to translate.
Of course.
Because he or she, of course, is well versed in English and she can easily get the meaning. But if I have to bring that unsaid, as I said, into another language, then I have to reveal a lot of my secrets to my translator. And if I don't, really, if I don't reveal and if I don't trust the translator, which I would not do to anybody. Really, as a writer, one has so many tricks, I mean, all of you know as a writer, and one has to reveal that.
There is that degree of intimacy involved in translating one's work. And I think, again, the notion of working directly with a translator must, I think, again, as you say, reveal the secrets. Coco, I liked your point too, speaking of tenses with them. How do you write history in a language with no past tense?
Yes, it's strange because in Burmese there's no past tense, and in Finnish there's no future tense.
Well, no wonder God and the devil are the same.
So I'm in between, a rock and a hard place, and yes, that is. So I don't write history, and yeah. And when it comes to translating my poems into the languages, I don't know. I really would like to trust the translator. Yeah, and then I will, because me being a translator myself, I would like to give him or her full autonomy and the way I would like to do with the poems that I'm translating.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I usually do. Yeah.
Right. And especially, again, when translating poetry, where even more so than fiction, what you're looking for is writing another poem that reflects the original, as opposed to rendering that original perfectly faithfully to the original. We also have a question from the audience, again, the constant question, about degrees of faithfulness in translation. I think there's, again, as Borges said, the original is not faithful to the translation. And I think obviously there's a difference between being faithful and, if you think about being faithful and betraying. And I think we've all come across translations that do, in fact, betray. But what constitutes faithfulness? I think obviously we can only talk about linguistic faithfulness, but there's a conceptual faithfulness that would we say is more crucial, equally crucial?
I think there's a soul in each poem.
The soul.
Yeah, so we have to be faithful to the soul of the poem when translating. Yeah.
The soul.
To the soul.
Soul, yeah.
Oh. And about and what does constitute that soul? Again, we're getting into theology, aren't we? We better see what you bring up Zeus and the devil, and
Yes,
here we
yes,
are.
I can relate to that because soul leaves body when it's supposed to leave body when you pass away, and in Buddhism it is often referred to as like a candle dies and then you light it with another candle. It's not the same candle, but it's a different candle, but the same light. So a translation should remain that way, in the way that the soul is carried into another body of language. Yeah.
And the way that the light is maintained.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Oh, that's very nice. Nice. Let's see, we're almost out of time. We have another question from the audience. And again, this is not a question to pose with 1 minute left in the panel, but. Oh, okay. There's a question on the relationship between language and class. And I think that, obviously, Shenaz, you touched on questions, not so much of class as in questions of colonization with Creole and French. But obviously, language has a very powerful cultural role in countries of multiple languages. Odeh, you made the wonderful point that when you write in Hebrew, you are still very much an Arab. And again, I think we would all agree that when we write in whatever language, we are bringing all of ourselves. What about these cultural relationships in language? How have they affected your writing? Any of you? Odeh, yes.
I think it's a lot because you must keep your identity when you write in English, in Hebrew, in anywhere. If you throw out all your legacy or baggage with cultural and all the things that around you in Arabic world and Arabic in your life, I think you will be another man, another person.
Yes.
So when I spoke here, all the time when I write, I remembered Al-Mutanabbi, I remembered another people. This make your writing, it's not I don't make this in advance. I don't decide before I am writing that I must bring some Arabic examples, or it's come to me through writing, yeah? That when I speak about the ancient Arab poems, I remember their poems, so I put it. And I think it's very important also to the readers to know about my cultural life. And I think during this, that you bring your cultural baggage with you, baggage, not baggage, baggage.
Bagage is rather nice. I like that.
My wife said to me, no, don't say baggage, baggage. What? Baggage or something like this. That you throw. And no, I read it in Skype, and she said, okay. And this is very important. And I want from the Hebrew writer also bring me his legacy. And also from Indians. I think it's very important. At the end, I think, all the human experience in its roots, in deep levels, is the same. When I wrote when my novel was translated to Hebrew, it's called Zatunia, The Seeds of Zatunia, about election. And a lot of Hebrew readers called me and said, this is what you describe here is the same what's going in the Jewish town. And I think others, one reader that she lived in America she knows Hebrew well. She said the same. The same ambitions, the same, the same desires, the same feeling you can find in all the people. So if you bring this legacy, I think it will be very nice.
Absolutely. Shenaz.
I think the question of language and class is very important, very interesting, and very central. If I refer to the situation in Mauritius, for example, Creole is considered as an inferior language because it's a language of the small population, and French and English are the languages of the elite, of the culture, of the literature. So there's a tendency to underrate what we can say in our own language, and that's very damaging, I think. I've been asked many times, why do I waste my time writing in Creole?
How rude.
Yeah, because, well, people tell me, you have a publisher in France, your books are edited in French, so why do you waste your time writing stories and publishing in Creole? And I think that's a question that's, for me, totally stupid and out of place, because there are stories that come to me in French, and I write them in French, and there are stories that come to me in Creole, and I write them in Creole, and I can't explain why, and I think I'm not interested even in knowing why, because perhaps then I would stop writing, I don't know. But it's just that, for me, each language has its word. For example, in Creole, when you talk about filiation, you won't say my cousin. You'll say mon maman, son frère, son garçon, which means it shows the tree. You'll say my mother, her elder brother, a second son. So that's how we say
This
it in
mean
Creole.
uncle.
Yeah.
All this to
Yes.
mean uncle. Oh, okay.
All this to mean cousin.
Oh, cousin, yeah.
It really shows that it's a different way of conceiving the world and expressing it. And so I think for me there are no inferior languages. They are just stupid attitudes.
Yes. There are foolish restrictions placed. But, and again, it is of course a question. One development in French literature, and of course this is going to be terribly simplistic because it's such a complicated topic, but there's been a shift in the last few years of non-continental French writers, African French writers, colonized writers from previously colonized regions, writing in French and actually taking quite a lot of awards as a result. And again, certain members of the French literary establishment have been quite horrified by this. They would, wouldn't they? But again, it is an interesting shift to talk about notions of class and also notions of, again, that word that's so much in the news this week, appropriation, and the whole notion of what language we write in, what language is used, what language a nation's stories, a culture's stories, a people's stories are told in. What language represents this history, both personal and political. So, other thoughts on language, class? Yes, Stephanos.
Yeah, I think, rather than just call it class, I mean, I think it's all kinds of categories.
Yes, of course.
So it's more, I mean, I think this is why the title of this panel was so important, because it's on the edges, and there's questions of gender, ethnicity, race, and symbolic, all the different symbolic orders. And I think rather than identifying with any particular one or even any nation, I think the task of the writer is always to transgress and elude all of these borders and bring something, something like that Coco called the soul. I mean, we can name it in different ways.
Yes.
It's something elusive, but it's a way of like breaking and crossing and transgressing the different borders. So, I mean, I think class to me is a little bit too much. It comes back to more traditional Marxist theory, which is important because it brings in the question of power and hegemony. But there's all kinds of hegemonies besides the what we normally understand by class. So it's a question of destabilizing the powers and domination of different symbolic orders, I think.
Yes, and again, the notion of, I think the notion of the power, and of course the utmost power should be language, and what language can do, and how it can cross borders. And again, cross borders and pretty much trample them and redraw them, which I think is what we see. Certainly, I think that's what any of us who work on translation into English, into other languages, are working again to transcend borders, to dissolve. As we've been talking, have there been any further questions and further thoughts? Oh yes, sorry, Aaron.
I don't know. It's not something that is. There's no set pattern for me. I mean, I don't say, well, I've written that story in Creole and I have to translate it in French. Yes, sometimes, but then I could do it, but I don't know, I don't absolutely feel the need to do it, and I can't really explain that. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a question for you. When you write, did you write this for two different set of readers?
No, I don't write for a reader. My drawers are full of things that I write not to be published. I don't write with a view to be published in the first place. I write because there are things that I feel strongly and that I want to express in that way, but not everything that I write is meant to be published. I don't write in that perspective. So, what was your question?
Natasha, I think you.
No, I agree with you absolutely. I mean, I wasn't disagreeing with the notion of class, just the way we interpret class. There's many ways that we classify each other, and in term not simply working class, middle class, rich. This gender, ethnicity, and different kinds of groupings, and I think also in this particular election you're seeing that complexity, isn't it? I mean, I think is the working class with Hillary, or are they with Trump? And which working class? And there's a white working class and there's a black working class. So I mean, I think there's a lot of complexities going on there. That's all I meant. But the concept of class, of course, if we look at it, but we have to nuance what we mean by it. I think that's what I meant.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to make sure that people have a chance to reply to Mary's question.
Yes.
And I want to say something. Yeah? I think, right, we are here, and we, during our stay here, we know a lot about our colleague here, the writers from different countries during the language, the English language, and without the English, if we don't translate this your text to the English language, we can't understand. So it's enrich me to know about your experience through the English language. I think also in people who are suffering from conflicts, for example, in our case between Arab and Jewish, Palestinian and Israel, I think to translate literature to both languages is very, very important, because the speech in the political text is a speech of confrontation, yeah? Confrontation, yeah? But the speak in the speeches in the literature is another thing. For example, when I read Amos Oz, it's a very great writer. I think that some of you know. I can see my personality in his characters. I see people like me, and I can even be I can have a sympathy to these characters. But when I read the text outside of the literature, I cannot find this. So in Arabic, when I write in Arabic and Jewish people read me, so have their sympathy to Arab characters. They see him not a position of enemy, but he see him in a position of ordinary man, that he want to live a good life. So I think this is, to translate literature, I think it's very important missions for us who write in different language, and for those who want to develop peace between the people. Thank you.
So this, perfect ending, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for coming. Natasha.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Susan, for moderating.